He walked into the bank dressed sharp, confident, and unnoticed. To them, he was just another black man holding a check. But when the manager looked at the numbers, her smirk said it all. She didn't believe it was his. In front of everyone, she tore it apart like his success meant nothing. The room went silent. Eyes stared. Some laughed. Some whispered. But what happened next? No one in that building was ready for. Because this man wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO, and his response would leave the entire bank stunned. Before that humiliating moment in the bank, his life told a different story. He wasn't born into privilege. He knew the sting of poverty, the weight of doubt, and the sound of doors slamming in his face. Growing up, every step forward had been a battle teachers who doubted his potential, employers who overlooked his talent, and neighbors who whispered that someone like him would never amount to much. But with grit carved into his bones, he rose. Through late nights and endless failures, he built an empire from nothing. His company now stretched across states, employing hundreds, changing lives, breaking barriers. To his employees, he was more than a boss. He was proof that greatness could come from the unlikeliest places. But to strangers, especially those blinded by prejudice, he was still just another face to dismiss. He walked into that bank not as a beggar or a borrower, but as a leader carrying a check that represented years of sweat and sacrifice. The marble floors, the polished counters, the cold air conditioning, all of it reminded him of places he'd once been told he didn't belong. Yet here he stood, confident, expecting the respect he had earned. But respect was not what he received. Instead, behind the manager's smile hid the same contempt he had fought against his entire life. She didn't see a CEO. She didn't see a man who had built an empire. She only saw her assumptions, and in the cruelest gesture, she shredded his check right before his eyes, and that single act would light a fire that no one in that building could ever forget. The room went silent the moment the shredder roared to life. The crisp sound of the paper tearing into ribbons cut deeper than any insult. For a second, he just stood there, stunned. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It wasn't just ink. It was the tangible proof of his struggle, his victories, his empire. Years of work dismissed in a blink, reduced to confetti. Gasps echoed from nearby customers, but none dared to speak. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked away, too uncomfortable to witness the cruelty. The manager, a woman in a navy blue suit with a polished badge, didn't flinch. She placed her manicured hands flat on the counter and tilted her head as if she'd done nothing more than reject a fraudulent request. "Policy," she said coldly, though no policy in the world could justify what she had done. Her eyes weren't on the paper, they were on him, judging, condemning. Heat rushed to his face, but he didn't let his anger show. Years of being underestimated had taught him to master his expression. Still inside, his chest burned. He could feel every eye on him, waiting to see how the black man with the check would react. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Had he made a mistake coming here? Should he have sent an assistant, someone who didn't carry the weight of skin that triggered bias before words were even spoken? But then he reminded himself, no. This was his right. His success wasn't up for validation. It was earned, undeniable. Yet the injustice stung. He thought of the young interns in his company who looked up to him, the communities his foundation supported, the generations he fought to inspire. What message would this send if he stayed silent? That they could build, they could strive, and still be reduced to nothing by a single act of prejudice? The hum of whispers grew louder. A security guard in the corner shifted uncomfortably. He could sense the tension but did nothing. The manager glanced at her colleagues behind the counter, and they smirked as though watching entertainment unfold. He steadied his breath. This wasn't the first door slammed in his face. But this time, he wasn't the boy from the projects with empty pockets. He wasn't the struggling student scraping coins for textbooks. He wasn't the underpaid worker cleaning offices after hours. He was a CEO, and this time the world was watching. Slowly, he leaned forward, his voice steady, calm, but laced with authority. "Do you know what you've just done?" he asked quietly. The manager arched an eyebrow, clearly unafraid. "I've enforced our standards," she replied, dismissive, as if shredding a multi-million-dollar check was just another Tuesday. But outside the glass walls of the bank, passers-by had started gathering. The scene was too unusual to ignore a man in a tailored suit, holding his ground while a manager treated him with open contempt. Phones were raised, cameras recording. This wasn't just a private insult anymore. This was becoming public. And still, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence carried weight. His posture radiated strength. The humiliation was real, but so was the storm building in his eyes. This wasn't over. What no one in that building knew was that the very bank they stood in wasn't just another branch to him. It was tied to deals, investments, and futures that stretched further than anyone could imagine. And in just a few moments, the balance of power in that room would shift so dramatically that the sound of the shredder would haunt them forever. The shredders were fated, but the echo of humiliation remained heavy in the air. The manager folded her arms, lips curled in satisfaction, as though she had put someone in his place. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. The CEO straightened his shoulders, his gaze cutting across the marble lobby. Calm, deliberate, unshaken. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a slim black folder embossed with gold. With a steady hand, he placed it on the counter. The sound of the folder hitting the glass was louder than the shredder had ever been. The manager frowned, irritated, flipping it open with a sigh. But the moment her eyes scanned the letterhead, her smirk collapsed. It bore the official seal of the bank's corporate headquarters. A partnership agreement, signed, binding, and at the bottom, his name not as a client, but as one of the bank's largest investors. Gasps swept the lobby. Phones kept recording. The truth was undeniable now. The man she had dismissed wasn't there to cash a suspicious check. He was there to finalize a deal worth billions, a deal that made him not just a customer, but part owner of the very institution she worked for. Her hands trembled as she flipped the pages, realizing too late what she had done. This wasn't just rudeness. This was sabotage, discrimination caught on camera, and a direct insult to one of the bank's most powerful partners. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence, his calm stare, was enough to strip away every ounce of her arrogance. The same customers who had turned away moments earlier now leaned forward, whispering, shaking their heads in disbelief. "You shredded the future of this bank," he finally said. His tone low, steady, commanding. The weight of those words crushed her. Her knees almost buckled, her authority shattered. Every eye in the building was on her now, not him. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted forever. The manager's face drained of color as the weight of her mistake sank in. Around her, whispers grew into an audible storm. Phones were still rolling, capturing every second of her downfall. What had begun as a quiet humiliation of a man she assumed had no power had turned into a public revelation of her own arrogance and prejudice. But the CEO didn't need to humiliate her back. He had already won, not just with his wealth, not just with his signature on corporate papers, but with the truth exposed in front of everyone. He had endured her contempt, and instead of lashing out, he let her own actions destroy her credibility. Security approached, uncertain of what to do. But they weren't looking at him anymore. They were waiting for his word, his command. With one calm nod, he signaled them away. Authority was no longer in her hands. He closed the folder and tucked it back into his briefcase, then turned toward the gathering crowd. His voice, firm but steady, carried across the lobby. This is what prejudice does. It blinds us. It makes us destroy what we should protect. It makes us small when we think we're powerful. Today, she didn't just shred my check. She shredded the values this place is supposed to stand for. The silence that followed was heavy charged. Customers shifted, some nodding, some ashamed. Even those who had once looked away now felt the sting of his words. He didn't linger. He didn't need to. As he walked out of the building, cameras followed, capturing the image of a man who had just turned an act of humiliation into a lesson the world wouldn't forget. By the end of the day, the video spread like wildfire. Headlines carried the story. Discussions erupted online. And across boardrooms, universities, and neighborhoods, people asked the same haunting question. How many more stories like this remain unseen, unheard, because of the color of someone's skin? The check was gone, but his message remained more valuable than any piece of paper.